Hey, everybody. Simon's a little tired tonight, so we're not going to have a strength class. We're going to sit around and we're going to chat a little bit about, I don't know, Simon's day on Sunday. Let's just see what he was up to. And what I'll do for the video is I'll put, I think it will record what I select. So I'm going to put it in speaker mode. And of course, I click that button and Karen, you're on my full screen here for some reason, silently sitting there. But you know what? Oh, there. Okay. Well, now it's Simon. There. Okay. Well, let's try this. So, Simon Jones, our coach, did Ironman Tremblant on Sunday. Back in July, I called Simon this morning and we resisted talking about the race because I proposed to him that we do it this way and we record it. Because back in July, I got together one-on-one with Ben, another OOF member, after he did Ironman Lake Placid. And it was such a fun conversation talking about the adventure that is Ironman, that I thought it would be fun to do the very same thing with Simon. So I'll lead the questioning, and Simon and I will hit it back and forth. But for sure, in 20 minutes or so, we'll open the floor to questions. So Simon, to start, let's put some perspective on this visit to Tremblant, which wasn't your first. So let's go back. A quick review of the start of your triathlon career and then your stops on the Ironman circuit, your Tremblant stops. So tell us about your entry into the triathlon world.
All right, so my first ever triathlon was actually in Derby in the UK, and this would have been, got to really think about this one. Well, I'm showing my age. 2003, maybe 2004, or could have been 2004, 2005. So I have always been a swimmer, but had a pause with swimming. So I always enjoyed swimming, always biked when I was younger, and well, always biked all the time, but it was more kind of to get to places than anything else once I got to a slightly older age. And running was more a thing I did to keep fit for swimming and soccer. So I just decided it would be fun at one point to do a triathlon because my brother was doing one. So I entered a sprint, a short sprint in a pool, and Derby in those years, whatever year it was, and it was great. Really enjoyed it. The whole atmosphere was fantastic. I know a lot of people who do triathlon find the whole atmosphere around the races, the welcoming kind of friendly people you tend to get who are always willing to help no matter what kind of level they're at. It was really just a fun experience. So I did one that year, I did one the following year, and then didn't do another one until 2013. So it was a big gap. But in that time, I moved from the UK to Canada and had a lot of different things going on and had children. So yeah, many things changed. And I got to 2012 and decided that I needed to kind of get control of my health and kind of look after myself a little bit more. And triathlon kind of came back into my life at that point, more kind of by coincidence than anything else. I started swimming again, and I met somebody who was going to do a somersault race, heard out about the somersault races, and ended up signing up for the early bird, where I think I met you, Geordie, at the early bird. Managed to surprise myself by, I think, coming fourth overall and winning my age group. And then kind of caught the bug again at that point and haven't looked back since. So that's kind of my introduction to triathlon, spread over many years, but that's certainly kind of the restart of it would have been 2013. So yeah, lost a lot of weight, and all through kind of the desire to get better at improving my time. It was never kind of about winning everything. I always have a competition with myself, which is kind of a downfall in some places. But it's always, about that self-improvement and being healthy, and it's kind of turned into a lifestyle for me. So
when did Ironman come onto the into the view?
so I said, I couldn't tell you which year it was, but I did say I'd never do an Ironman. That's a stupid, crazy thing to do. But then there was always that, I got to the point where I'd done the sprint, and then I thought, well, okay, I'll do a year or so of sprint distances, and then I'd go on to Olympic. And then after I'd done a year of Olympic, I kind of thought, well, it'd be fun to do the 70.3 distance. And then it was just in the back of your mind, it's like, well, I probably could do that full iron distance. But it's a crazy idea. No, I'd still never want to do it. But I think it just kind of, it bugged me. And it was, well, if I don't try it now, I'm not going to get any fitter. I may not get any healthier. So it wouldn't be a case of now or never, but if it's I'll probably regret it if I don't try it. So that probably would have been around the 2016 time. So I'd done Olympics at that point. I would have done two 70.3s at that point, and I really enjoyed them. They're kind of the push yourself to the 85 to 90% all the way through. So you're not redlining all the way through, but you're pushing pretty hard.
Sorry,
was just that,
I'll just interrupt, and I'll say on behalf of the rest of us, you're pushing very hard. We're going as slow as possible in hopes that maybe we'll just reach the finish line.
Yeah, fair enough. It's very much for me, the sprints are that kind of 120% theoretical limit. You push yourself as hard as you possibly can from start to finish. And going into that Ironman is very, very different. You manage your effort level differently. There's the whole aspect of nutrition that complicates matters beyond belief. And trying to manage all of that in the space of the time you have is a huge challenge. And I still haven't mastered it after 4 races, but there's so many outside factors that you can't control. And I'm sure we'll get onto some of those today. So
tell me about your first, briefly about your first 3, and then we'll move on to talk about Sunday.
So my first one, I did a marathon in the same year because I'd never done a marathon before, and I wanted to test out whether my body wanted to do that kind of distance, because the thought of running that far was a little bit intimidating. I'd done half marathons, and that was fine. I did the army run in 2014, I think it was. So I'd done the half distance, and that was okay. But obviously doubling that up was a very different thing. And then again, adding in nutrition was something brand new to me, really. So I had to really think about, well, how was I going to manage the marathon, and how could I put that into training for Ironman, and how does it compare? Because obviously you don't have everything that leads into the marathon when you're just doing the standalone race. So I did that. And then the following year, the same year, I had my first attempt. I was expecting that I had a good plan, but it definitely fell apart once I got onto the run. My stomach very much decided that any kind of food was a bad idea. So I very rapidly ran out of energy at around 6 kilometers, and pretty much ended up walking the rest of the marathon. So I looking back, I consumed too much, and had too much solid food, which certainly at the intensity I wanted to push myself was too much for my body to absorb and adapt to. So it's very much a unique individual thing for the nutrition side of things. You have to be able to test it, and you have to test it in many different conditions, and be very adaptable, which comes back to this weekend. So the first race, it was a very humbling experience. I had a rough goal of where I wanted to end up, and I was very, very far from it. And it was a difficult day. I signed up for the following year on the way home in the car after getting permission from my family, because I knew I could do way better. I think it's hard. I don't think you could go into your first long distance race. I think I'll say at this point, I don't think there's ever such thing as a perfect Ironman. It was never going to go perfectly. There's always going to be something that isn't going quite right, or there's something that will happen that you have to adjust to. So you have to kind of go in with that flexible, anything's going to happen approach, and just have contingencies, and then just a way to change if you can. So first year.
So year 2 and year 3 went a lot better, especially year 2.
They did, yeah. So year 2 was my most successful so far. I took off, I think, 2.25 hours off my time. I reduced down the amount of food I took in on the bike, and kind of made a point of, after 3.5 hours on the bike, I wouldn't consume any solid food anymore, and did a lot more testing on how that would work. And everything went pretty well, but I still faded off within the run. Which again, it's a really hard balance of pushing to a limit on the bike and then not going over that limit, and trying to, control your desire to keep the speed up. Especially Tremblant is a very back heavy course on the fatigue on the legs. So you get through a lot of kind of cruising on a highway, and then you hit the steeper hills. So it's very easy on each loop to kind of fatigue yourself for either the second half of the bike, or fatigue yourself for the run. So you have to really kind of manage that desire to push at certain points within the course.
So let's fast forward to Sunday, and we'll set the table here, since triathlon is a data-driven sport for many people out there. Was it 12:45 your first one?
So yeah, around 12:40 something. Second one was 10:15. My third one was 10:27, I think it was, and then the weekend it was 11:31. So
with the goal, your goal through training as you were preparing for this one was what?
I was aiming to go sub 10, not by much. I was hoping to be, even if it was a second under 10 hours, that would have been fantastic. I honestly changed my expectations in kind of the week leading up to it, and especially a couple of days beforehand, once I knew what the weather was going to be like. It was unrealistic to achieve that. It was never going to happen because of the heat, the rain, the storms. There was too many factors that would have made it virtually impossible to beat that time. So I had to adjust my expectations. Disappointing though it may be, you have to be realistic that the weather plays a significant impact on what you're able to achieve.
One might also say that COVID could play a potential role as well. So.
Yeah. So I had, after managing to avoid it for a long time, I got COVID on the 31st of July, probably, was when I first started experiencing symptoms. And I took 7 days of doing absolutely nothing, other than painting a room. that was my kind of, I'm doing something, I'm painting a room, so it's not nothing. But bad timing. It would have been easy at that point to go back into training and kind of really beat myself up trying to catch back up with the fitness that I thought I'd lost. Over 7 days, you're not going to lose a dramatic amount, and you really have to try and kind of think about that when you have to take time off. It's not as bad as you always fear it might be, but you do kind of have a lingering effect from that, because it affects your respiratory system. It's just, even now, I still get I'm coughing stuff up, not to be gross, but it's still affecting my breathing a little bit at times. So it would have had an impact. You know, I was very careful. I have a good friend who's a doctor who actually did the race as well at the weekend. So I had lots of conversations with him. I had ECGs, I had echocardiograms, I had blood tests before I started training again, just to make sure that I wasn't going to, you know, do some serious damage. So once I started training, I knew I was okay to proceed. But yeah,
All
it
right.
was an interesting factor.
So you regard, despite all of the obstacles, you
Yes.
find yourself with your family awakening early on Sunday morning in Mont-Tremblant, Quebec, Canada.
Yeah.
And how did you feel pre-race? How did the preparations go as you headed to the start line?
I get to the point now. I think I've done I wouldn't say so many races, but I've done enough races now that I still get nervous, which is a good thing because it primes your body for that you know, the activity. But I don't kind of get really nervous until race morning. Maybe a little bit on the night before, but there is so much to occupy you in the lead up to that event that you're just so busy preparing bags and doing kit drop-offs and going to briefings and everything. There is so much happening that you're just going through your checklists and making sure that everything is as you expect it to be. Then you start thinking about, well, what happens if such and such goes wrong, and what adaptations do you have, and what could you do? And then I just try and relax as much as I can. And I think having my family with me is always a great thing. One of the things that kind of led me to get back into triathlon was trying to set a good example for my children and being a good role model. And having them there and seeing them enjoy the whole atmosphere and the whole event is fantastic. So it very much, I sit with them, you know, we do things together. I try not to move too much the day before, but you know, we've gone off and we've done like birds of prey shows, and they've gone off and done lots of activities, and I've kind of carefully walked around and watched. It just takes your mind off things and just makes it a whole kind of enjoyable family weekend rather than it being all about the racing. So it's always good if you can to make it more of just an enjoyable event rather than a focused kind of, oh my god, I've got a race scenario. So yeah.
So Simon, at the start line, I usually, for newer triathletes, I will often tell them that you know, as soon as the gun goes off, don't move. Just let everybody else and then work your way in and splash yourself and then start your thing. I don't think that's your strategy. So
no. So I
to the swim start, into the swim start, and through the whole swim, which was,
yeah.
You had a good swim, didn't you?
Yes, yeah, I was pretty happy with the swim. One of the things that is good for me is my swim. I wouldn't say I'm weak specifically in any particular leg, but the swim is something I'm generally always consistent in. I don't often have terrible swims, and I always tend to be putting myself fairly near the front on the swim. So I think I was in the third row leaving on Sunday. So it's good, but it doesn't leave you a lot of time to get ready. And that's one of the things that I always find is a bit of a battle for me, is I get access to the transition zone at 5 a.m. and I start at 6:45. So there's a lot to do in the morning of the race, and you've got to walk from where you're staying over to the swim start. So it's always a little bit of a panic getting there in time and getting everything on. And the previous time I raced, my wife had an unfortunate incident literally at I think it was about 6 o'clock in the morning, and I was running from the hotel over to swim start to get going. So it's good to be near the front, but it has its drawbacks as well. So yeah, I got a good start. I do leg it into the water and do the funny run with the legs going all over the place, and then do the dolphin dives. I got a good start. I was in a good position, and the people around me were similar kind of speed, so it worked out well. I hate drafting people. I'm a confident swimmer. I swim straight. I never think anybody else swims straight. So I can't be on somebody's hip. I don't like being on somebody's feet. So I try it, but generally I find that the person in front of me never swims straight. So it's really hard for me to find somebody that I like to follow. And I try generally to find somebody around me, but it usually peters out pretty quickly. So as it always does, it did in this race as well. I had somebody who was the perfect kind of speed come alongside me, but all they did was constantly go off to the right, and they stayed at the same speed as me. So they were just pushing me further and further across. And it was happening for quite a while. So I thought, well, I could put a burst of speed in, try and get in front of them, get out of the way. But I didn't want to burn any matches at that point. And that's kind of key in the swim, is you can, they always say you can't win the race in the swim, but you can certainly, lose it, or at least put yourself a little bit further back than you expect by draining yourself down too much. So I chose to slow down a little bit, kind of go over the back of his legs as soon as he was out of the way, and get back to going straight. And then this is something we've talked about in our open water practices before. If you're drafting somebody, don't tap their feet every few seconds. And I had somebody for 2 kilometers tapping my feet. And it was the most irritating thing. And I know how far it was because my watch beeps at me every 500 meters. So I know that he was there. There was nothing I could really do. I just carried on swimming, but it slows me down. It slows him down because he's not extending properly on his catch. But yeah, 2 kilometers of that was fun. And then eventually we lost him, and the rest of the swim was uneventful, except for the shape of my head. I know I've mentioned this to you before, Geordie, but my head shape does not work well with swim caps, and I lose a cap virtually every single race I swim in. And true to form, 800 meters to go, my cap was kind of on the top of my head and then just popped off. So 800 meters with the hair flowing through the water, being non-streamlined and everything was fantastic. So I had a goal of, so in 2019, which is my last race at Tremblant, I finished in 1 hour and 1 second. So I was very confident heading into it that I could beat the 1 hour mark. And I finished in 1 hour and 31 seconds this time. So I dropped back a little bit, but all good swim. So
we're gonna blame the swim cap and the guy tapping your feet, and yeah,
absolutely. Easily 30 seconds in there, I'm sure.
Definitely. And I think since they have artificial intelligence guided custom goggles, they've got to have the same thing for a swim cap size. So
I think so. Yeah,
we're going to find one for you.
I've tried all kinds of things, because you put sunscreen on beforehand, and I try not to put it too high up so it doesn't start slipping off. I usually have my goggles under my hat. I've tried it with my goggles over my hat. One year I had goggles, so I had one hat, then I had my goggles, and then I had another cap over the top of that. Both hats came off and the goggles somehow managed to stay on. Go figure that one out. I still to this day don't know.
It's like the what do you call it, the tablecloth trick.
Yeah. They stayed on perfectly, didn't even leak. So
we're into transition. It's a good little jog into this.
Yeah, it is.
How did that feel, and how did you settle in onto the bike as well? So talk us through that.
Yeah, so Ironman transitions, if you haven't done a full distance Ironman event, are a little bit different to every other one you'll probably do, in that you run to transition in the same way. And if you're not using the wetsuit strippers, which they didn't have this year anyway, you try and lower the wetsuit down as much as you can, so that once you get to your transition point, you can get it off easier. So the way the Ironman transition tent works is you go in, you pick up your T1 bag, which has your bike helmet in it, possibly your bike shoes and everything you need for the bike. I'll put my nutrition that I'm going to have in transition in the bag, but I'll also put some nutrition in my tri-suit at that point as well, because you need so much. I try not to stop at bike special needs if I can avoid it. So I have all my nutrition that I need for the next 5+ hours in with me. So yeah, you grab your bag, you go into the little kind of changing area within the transition tent, get everything off from the wetsuit and everything, and then head off over to your bike with everything you need for the bike. That went really well. Everything nice and smooth. I had my bike shoes on my bike, which we were allowed to do this year, which is another slight modification on previous years. They've usually had it that it's a totally clean transition, so nothing is beside your bike. It's literally just your bike and nothing else. So you can either run in your bike shoes, or what I've done in the past is run with my bike shoes in my hand, put them on at my bike. Main reason, I don't want to damage my cleats too much by running too much on the pavement. Got started on the bike. I think I probably reached about 100 meters into the bike, and then it started to rain. It was a hot day. It was a hot day. It wasn't too bad. It was overcast at that point when we started. Once we got to the end of the swim, it got a little bit kind of heavier cloud. It wasn't too bad. It was kind of light rain at the start, but yeah, everything started off well. The biggest thing I would say is a challenge after that duration of swim, and then the kind of the transition where you're trying to be as quick through it as possible, is getting your heart rate down. I don't have a power meter on my bike. I train with power, but a lot of my the way I judge my effort is, obviously heart rate varies based on conditions, based on how you're feeling, but it's really a perceived effort and heart rate combination that I use for the race. So I know roughly where my heart rate should be on an average day. And I know generally that for the first 10 kilometers of that bike, my heart rate's going to be high, and I have to kind of gauge my effort level to get it down. There's a climb as soon as you get around the corner, and there's a lot of kind of hills that you can spike your heart rate on the way out towards the highway. So yeah, you have to kind of judge that a little bit. Once we got onto the highway, and this still amazes people who were in the village, we had the most torrential rain I think I've ever raced in, even perhaps ridden a bike in. It was so hard, it was hurting my shoulders because it was pelting you with such heavy drops. Everything on the bike was just being, washed with water. The roads were, you couldn't see the actual road surface. It was just water. It was torrential, absolutely torrential. And this was for most of that highway stretch out and back. No wind, the wind was pretty much non-existent. So you were just creating your own wind from your speed. But yeah, it was wet, and it was because of that, it cooled you down. And this is where the complexity of the bike is something that I need to try and I find an answer to. I don't really have a solution to it in my mind yet. So that was lap one. Lap two, it had dried out by the time I had gone up the steep hills at the end of the first lap. And then the sun had come out. It was baking hot. And really hot and humid, and the wind had got up as well. So you'd gone from being comfortable temperature wise, a little bit uncomfortable with the heavy rain, but certainly not needing the level of hydration that I'd planned to have, to needing more hydration than I could possibly get through. So usually you head into an event thinking, well, it's going to be a hot race, it's going to be a cold race, it's going to be wet, or that the whole of the bike leg is going to be a kind of a consistent temperature or very similar. This was so different. I don't, and this is one of the things that I need now to work on, is how do I make that adjustment within a race to adjust for that level of difference? Because the example is that on the way out on that first lap, I was not getting through the bottles that I expected. I'd planned to refill my water bottle, and I had concentrated electrolyte and carbohydrate solution in a bottle in the back. So I top it up with water at each aid station, but I didn't need it. I wasn't, I didn't need that much, even though I'm very conscious of the fact that when it's cooler, you still have to hydrate yourself. But you could tell by the fact that I needed to pee, not to be crude, but you can feel in your body that you're overhydrating. So I tried to cut back a bit, but then I get some of my fueling from my drink. So if I cut back on my drink, I'm cutting back on my carbohydrate load, which is also how I'm fueling myself for the race. So, looking at how I solve that solution, I could say, well, I don't ever fuel from my drink. I only take electrolytes from my drink. That's a possible solution, but then you have to carry way more in the way of fuel, whatever you use. So I don't know. Honestly, I'm still going to have to work on that one, because I don't know how many times I'm going to go through an event where you get that polarized a bike.
And the mountains, if it's going to happen, the likelihood is up in the mountains. Weather's always more changeable, right?
Yeah.
And so if you're heading back to Tremblant, you got to be ready for it.
Yeah.
Storms will blow in, on the seaside and such. But yeah, I think that as unusual as your experience was, it's not an unusual happening through the year in the mountains.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And we had thunder, we had storms all around us out on the highway. I spoke to Mark from Sports Stats afterwards. I know Mark quite well. He said they were borderline a couple of times considering cancelling. Is that a lot of people north of Montreal lost power. The storms were looking like they were heading towards Tremblant, and they were kind of preparing for that eventuality. But thankfully, it kind of skirted around us, and we didn't have to worry about it. But yeah, so I mean, I got through the first half fine. The second half, the heat and the wind really kind of took it out of me. I knew my bike, because it had literally been washed clean. All the lube on the chain was probably gone, just because of the level of jet wash that it had. I dropped my chain on the steepest climb on Duplessis. So I would say it was a bit of a rookie mistake in that I shifted front and back at the same time, and maybe just went a little bit too far. So I desperately tried to get the chain back on whilst I was still moving, but I ground to a halt real quick, and I got my foot out of that cleat just in time before I keeled over. The good thing about where I race is that because I'm close to the front on the swim and I have a good bike, I don't have a whole bunch of people around me. So apart from the embarrassment of perhaps falling off my bike, I also don't have a lot of people that I have to apologize to when I fall off my bike, if that happened. So it was good.
It's also, I think, a big benefit when you're descending Duplessis.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
I always warn athletes that descending Duplessis, you can have good descending skills, but if you're in the thick of it, you're counting everybody else having good descending skills too.
Yeah, and that always impacts me on lap 2, because on lap 2, I'm in the thick of everybody else coming through. So lap 2, I have to be a lot more cautious on the speed on the downhills. And
how did you feel emotionally? Two-part question here. How did you feel emotionally at the end of the bike, but also intellectually with regards to your nutrition state, as far as your feeding and fluid?
Yeah, so I was about 15 minutes behind my intended target at that point. I wanted to try and keep the swim the same, which I'd done. I was slightly faster than I previously had been in T1. My first lap of the bike was good. My second lap, I started to struggle a little bit to keep the heart rate where I wanted to. So I had to back off the pace a little bit to make sure that I didn't push the heart rate up too high. So I was about 15 minutes behind, but I wasn't unhappy with that. Given the conditions, that was fine. I was perfectly content with where I stood. So in previous years, I always find the balance of hydrating enough versus not enough being the biggest challenge in that race. Again, trying not to be too crude about it. In previous years, I've gone through a whole 10+ hour event and not needed to use the washroom at all, which to me is a sign that over that length of race that I haven't hydrated myself enough. So I did a lot of work on sweat testing, probably from April onwards, once the temperature started to warm up a little bit, to gauge what level of fluid I was losing. I never did an official sodium content test, but just based on experience for me, I'm not a light content of sodium in my sweat. So I knew that electrolyte wise, I had to take on board a decent amount. So I'd done the testing, and this year I was confident about how much I had to take on, but then the bike threw a complete spanner in the works, or wrench for, that's showing my Englishisms, Anglicism there. So yeah, it definitely changed it. And I was desperate to pee by the end of the bike. So I had to stop, before I went out on the run at the end of the transition. But to me, that was good. It meant that I was hydrated well, and I'd done enough on that second half of the bike to keep on top of hydration. Fueling wise, I felt fine. I had a little bit of kind of not cramping. My adductors were feeling like they could cramp up. So it was borderline on some of those last climbs. You kind of feel it starting up. You try and adjust your position and try to kind of make sure that it doesn't happen. And I managed to make sure it didn't. But I think I was definitely at my upper limit on the bike, but I don't think I went too far. So yeah, feeling good, feeling happy with it, not worried too much, and looking forward to getting onto the run and changing out of the position, because it's holding that aero position for 5.5 hours is quite the drain on the neck, on the shoulders. Traps are sore by the end of it, and that's one thing. Anybody who's kind of looking at doing that kind of length event, make sure that your core is strong to hold you in the position while your shoulders have got to be strong, your neck muscles have got to be strong. It's not all about just the lower body. There's so much involved in keeping form on the bike, and that impacts the run so much. Your neck can be numb by the end of it. It's important to do kind of mini cat-cows as you're going along. When you drop below that kind of 20km/h point and that aerodynamics is no longer significant, sit up, stretch the neck, get the chin down a little bit so you're not in that constant chin up position, and just stretch things out. It's good to adjust your position occasionally over 5 hours.
So through T2 and out onto the run course, and how did your first couple K feel? That's always a huge indication of the state of your body. It's never a comfortable experience, but how was transition and then the first couple K?
Transition was great. I took my time. I always try and make sure heading out onto the run that I don't rush it. So I put sunscreen on. I make sure that my socks are not wrinkled up. I always wear socks for the longer events. Make sure my shoes are tightened up to the right amount. Short course racing, I'll use elastic laces and just shove them on and go. No socks, but for the longer distance, you need to make sure that everything's going to be comfortable. You don't want blisters or anything like that. So just took my time, took in some nutrition whilst I was sat down doing all that, and headed out. I would say I'm a bit of an oddball in that I actually really enjoy running off the bike. I find I actually run way better off the bike than I do by just going out straight for a run. So I don't think there's many people like me, but I find I have to really hold back. I'm great on the short course because I don't have to hold back. I just go. But on the longer course races, I really have to kind of watch the heart rate, try and keep the speed down, and keep everything under control. And this day was the same. I headed out. That first stretch is nice and flat. Once I'd made it out of the Portaloo, but it was comfortable. Got some hydration in on the way out, and felt good. Went up the first hill. First hill at Tremblant is a nasty one, really steep, fairly long. Always try and take it easy on that one. Have my family usually 3/4 of the way up. Always make a point of stopping, giving the kids a hug, and just kind of getting that little bit of a boost from seeing them. And then just crawl up the rest of the hill, and then try and crawl down the other side, because that's another thing that can really tire the legs out very quickly, is the downhills as well. Got around the corner, probably got to 2.5 kilometers, and my hamstring started to cramp up. Couldn't say why, didn't feel anything of that on the bike, was well within my limits on the bike, but just, yeah, tired hamstring. So walked that for a little stretch. Got halfway up the next hill, both adductors started to cramp up. So something was off. And I at the moment, I'm putting it down to the nutrition and the hydration on the bike not being quite right. Made it challenging to keep a constant effort level, but my heart rate was fine at the speed I wanted to go at. I had a target of the run speed, and I could hit the target within the heart rate. So I knew energy wise and capacity to run at that speed, I was great, but my legs were not cooperating at all. So I had to back off and tried to ease back into it. Tried not to run through the cramp too much, because I know I can make it more sore by doing that, and just kind of backed off a little bit, and that was okay. But I probably got 6 kilometers, 7 kilometers in, and then I started getting left knee pain. I have had that occasionally. Quad gets tight, hip flexor gets tight, and that for me ends up with knee pain. So unfortunately, at that point in the race, if I stop and I try and really stretch the quad, I know that my hamstring will cramp up, and I know that I'm going to end up causing other problems because of the relationship between those two muscles. I can't stretch one without the other one being unhappy about it. So I had to really back off around 10 kilometers and drop the pace down. And at that point, it became a real mental struggle for me. It was hard to not want to give up and just say, I'm not going to reach my targets. I am not going to achieve anything close to what I wanted to achieve. And that's nothing unusual for a race that long. I think you're always going to go through those tough points, and you have to be ready for that. And you have to have that, either the mantras or the ability to kind of talk yourself through it. And that's where the mental preparation comes in, is you've got to know that provided you're not going to physically do yourself any damage, you have to be able to push through those tough points. And I think that was probably the hardest point, was around that 10 kilometer point, where I had to balance am I doing too much? Am I going to make my knee, more injured? Or am I going to make it way worse? Or can I kind of manage it by doing a bit of walk running? Is there anything I can do to stretch it out? And can I continue? I didn't want to give up. I'd invested a lot personally, but that was less of a factor than not wanting to let my family down. More than anything, we've been through so much this year. And the whole, not premise of me doing this race, but this was a big distraction for me. It was to help keep me focused through the year. And I know that it didn't matter. We had a cancellation policy on it. I could have cancelled on the Wednesday before the race if anything had gone wrong for family. My daughter fractured her ankle on the Monday before the race as well, so that really played into the lead up really well. But we were happy that I could still race. Tamsin was in a good state, and we could still enjoy the weekend. So we went ahead and did the race. But I didn't want to let them down. I didn't want to kind of go through all of that and then just pull out because I couldn't handle the discomfort, because there's always discomfort in a race like that. You have to be able to push through that. And you see people who are in a far more challenging position get through the event, and it's all part of it. So yeah, that was the hardest point. I tried to evaluate, well, was I going to do myself damage? I decided that I wasn't going to. I knew it was tight muscles through the front of my leg that were causing the discomfort. So I chose to walk the aid stations, walk the hills, and then just try and maintain a good enough pace for every kind of gap between the aid stations. Still a huge challenge. Every time you stopped, it was just I could just walk a little bit further. It doesn't matter. But there was just times it's like, no, you give yourself a bit of a kick up the butt and say, no, you can run, you can do it, and just get on with it. So yeah, definitely needed to keep on top of hydration. I drowned myself in cold water and ice at every aid station because the heat and the humidity was unreal. That was a big factor on the run, and I think it was deceptive because it was overcast. We had thunderstorms, we had a bit of rain, but it was steamy. It was a bit like being in a sauna. So tough conditions for the run as well, especially.
So you mentioned your family, and you saw them at least a couple times on the run court. That must have always given you a boost seeing the family. But I do believe there was an extra boost on trips past your family.
There was, absolutely. So my kids were supplied with chalk and given a bit of a free-for-all to go and write messages on the road, which they dutifully did. And Geordie got in touch with my family and gave me some good news that the soccer team that I supported were having a good day. So I had the result of that game emblazoned on one of the streets in Tremblant, and I saw that on the street, and it was like, awesome, that's good. So I may not be having a great day, but the soccer team are. So
and Tam shared a photo of it with me, which I subsequently shared with the Brighton Twitterverse, and it went sort of viral amongst the.
It did. I have since seen that tweet, and I'm really impressed, Geordie. Yeah, that's fantastic.
All right, so take us into that final 5K, Si.
Yeah, that's one of the amazing things that your body is able to do. You can be in the worst state possible. When you certainly at Tremblant, there's a few different kind of parts to the course that you can really break it down into. The hilly part at the start, the flat, nasty stretch where you don't know whether you're going uphill or downhill, but it's never flat. For the middle bit, and then you head back and you turn around and you've got the hills on the way back. Those hills on the way back are 4.5, 5 kilometers of kind of just up and down hills. Once you hit them, you know that you're not far away, but it's the hardest part of the run. Once you get out from the old village at Lac Mercier and you get to the top of that hill, you know that it's within your limits, and you know that once you've got to that point, you can make it. Even if you have to crawl, you can make it that far. So your body gets this real kind of boost of adrenaline, and oh my God, I think I can actually make it to the end. And then when you hit the lake at Tremblant, you can see the town, see the village, and you know that you've got 2 more climbs to do. It's at that point where you find this ability to go that little bit faster. You really can be dead on your legs, but you still manage to get a little bit of a boost there, and then you can generally make it home with a smile on your face. Mainly the relief, I think, at that point. But yeah, it was fantastic. I had other people who I knew who were out watching, and I got quite a few cheers on the way around. And I walked past my family and I stopped with them every time, and there's a couple of other people who were just up the road, so I stopped and I slowed down and chatted to them as well. There was, at that point, I wasn't trying to beat a time, I just trying to finish. So it was very different to my first, I'm not going to use the word bad, my first challenging experience of racing the Iron Distance. The first time I did it, I just wanted to get off the course and go hide in the hotel room and not think about it. This was didn't go well. And so what? I had a good weekend, got through it, got things I can work on, and I dare say I'll be back again at some point to see if I can beat that 10 hours again. But the finish line there, the whole stretch through the village is something else. There's so much atmosphere. The whole experience of running through the village and seeing all the people, getting all the cheering, it's awesome. And then you have Mike Riley, who, if you don't know, is kind of the big announcer for Ironman, and he always seems to go to Tremblant. So having somebody there who is that well known and that iconic, kind of calling you over the finish line is awesome. So
And,
yeah,
and you have a name that won't be mispronounced.
exactly. Yeah, you can't beat that. So it was lovely. It was a lot quieter because of the number of people that entered the race. So I was literally on my own coming across the finish line. I walked as soon as I hit the carpet. I wanted to really just enjoy it. I had like I said, no time to beat. Another few seconds was completely irrelevant. So I just really tried to take it in and really trying to enjoy just crossing the finish line and take the atmosphere in. So all good. Well, not good, but all good.
Simon, thank you so much for sharing your race report and race story and all the details.
Absolute pleasure.
I'm going to I think I'm going to pause the recording or stop the recording here, but stick around because I know you guys probably have a question. I know Rob does for sure. So thanks again to Simon for being our guest.